screen, if you see, hover your cursor over your face, you'll see 3 dots. If you'll strike that, you'll see rename. If you could please rename yourself with your agency or your affiliation, then we will get a list of all of the attendees, and we don't necessarily have to go through the process of doing introductions. There will be an opportunity for questions and answers, and so please know that we do want to engage when we make some presentations. At this point, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Christine for opening remarks, and maybe Christine, just a 743 guidelines overview to kind of set the table for us as we go on to the actual process.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. I would also like to echo what Tony just said, that it has been a very collaborative 1.5 years working with LSA. I have, this process wouldn't be possible without the smart people from LSA and the modeling team from Fresno COG. So those teams are putting a lot of work. We are very open-minded, and also everybody is working really hard to try to achieve the best that we can for this process. Again, after 1.5 years, we are coming to almost the end of the process, and this probably is the last public meeting or workshop that we're going to have. So the regional guidelines have been accepted by Fresno COG's policy board last month. It's available on our website. The tools, the 2 technical tools that we're going to show you today, they're also live. There's also live on our website. We have also created a web page with step-by-step instruction for VMT analysis. That is also live on our website. We're going to show you how to use that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the overview of the regional guidelines. I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me. All right, can everybody see my screen? Okay, good. So, as you all know, SB743 took effect on July 1st this year. The law replaced level service with vehicle miles traveled, and the law was intended to really serve the state's GHG reduction goals by actually encouraging infill development and discouraging greenfield development. The law also encouraged VMT, also encouraged green projects such as transit back impact project, and also discouraged VMT inducing whitening projects. For the land use component of the legislation, like I said, it went into effect on July 1st this year. But for transportation projects on the state's highway system, the VMT implementation will take effect on September 15th of this year. So based on the study that we have done, the modeling exercises and analysis we have done, we are able to really tell that the SB743 has different impacts on our communities. The law is going to be helpful for infill projects in the urban core areas. Those infill projects probably are going to be expedited. And greenfield projects, at the outskirts of our metro areas, they're going to be probably a little more expensive to build. For small cities in the rural areas in our county, because residents living in these communities, they tend to have a longer daily commute. So it will be a little harder for these communities to, or more expensive, much more expensive for this community to attract growth, meaning housing and jobs, if that's their growth policies, their growth goals. In terms of transportation projects, SB743 is required to analyze the induced VMT from capacity projects. The induced VMT is those VMT that's caused by the capacity increasing projects that would not otherwise be there. And the way that the state's proposing to evaluate the induced VMT, it seems like those capacity increasing projects will produce big VMT numbers that will be needing very expensive mitigations. So the impact of this component of the law is going to have impact on project deliveries. A lot of counties, regions that have local transportation sales tax are very concerned about the project deliveries for those capacity projects that currently in their measure. And also there will be potential impact for the future sales measures, and how the sales measure will be shaped, because even if the regions, the locals are willing to fund capacity increasing projects on the state freeway system, but it could really mean that the project might have a hard time passing the VMT test, or it will be extremely expensive to mitigate the induced VMT impact. So these are the impacts we can see based on our analysis, based on our conversation with the state and other stakeholders. Fresno COG, we are actually not a secret lead agency. We undertook this task of creating a regional guideline for Fresno region, because Fresno COG, we have the active-based model, and we have been in the VMT business for a couple of decades. We have been working on SB743. We've been working on transportation conformity, which both involve VMT. So our policy board, instructed us to develop regional guidelines for our agency to use at their discretion. So all the recommendations in the guidelines that we develop are going to be advisory. It's not required for any agency to use. It will be at your discretion. Fresno COG, we will be providing technical assistance to the local government, to the developing communities, or to the traffic consulting firms. That's going to be our role. We're going to be providing technical assistance. So what's in the regional guideline, from a very high level, we created tools to screen out projects that can be exempt from the VMT analysis. We also developed a VMT calculation tool for smaller projects that don't necessarily have to go through the APM process, which could take weeks to do. And we also developed methodologies for VMT analysis for different projects, land use projects, transportation project, retail, office, residential. They're all included in our guideline. And also, the guideline also established substantial evidence for an alternative threshold for office and retail projects. That is, we recommended that 13% reduction is appropriate for the region based on our analysis, versus 15% is what the OPR recommended in the technical advisory. Also in the guideline, we provided a big list of potential mitigation measures that could be used by the local government or by the development communities for your project. Again, these are all recommended. These are recommended as a resource for you to use. It's not really required unless you decide that you want to follow the guidelines. So how can the local government use the guidelines? As I mentioned, I want to reiterate that the local government can use the guideline if you bring this guideline to your city council, or you ask the city council to endorse some components of the guideline. That's how you can apply the recommended methodology or threshold or tools from the guidelines. Local government can also have the option to develop your own guidelines, your own tools, and your own thresholds. That's another way of doing it. If you're not taking any action in terms of the guidelines, then what OPR recommended in the technical advisory will be the default. Then whenever there's a project coming in, then the OPR thresholds and methodology will be what you need to apply in your analysis. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Seth to show you the step-by-step instruction for VMT analysis, which is available on our website. Seth, are you ready? Should I?
Yes, Christine, thank you.
Okay.
All right, I think this will do it.
I'm sorry, Seth. Before you start, is there any questions for me at this point? Well,
nope, I'm okay.
Okay, sounds like we're good. Go ahead, Seth.
Thank you, Christine. Good afternoon, everyone.
Sorry, Seth, just one more thing. For all participants, there's a chat option. So you can also type in questions as we are going through the presentation through the chat option. Either, you can use that option as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Third time's a charm. All right, so I'm going to be talking about, we have a step-by-step guide on our website. The site that you're seeing right now that I'm on is from Fresno COG's main page. If you go to planning, down here to SB743, it takes you to our SB743 landing page. And from here, you can download the various tools that we've been talking about. What I'm talking about is specifically underneath right here, it says click to be taken to Fresno COG's VMT Analysis Step-by-Step Guide. And what this is, this first link here are the full regional guidelines that have been put up by LSA. I have it up over here, and on page 27, you have this figure 10, which is called VMT Analysis Process for Land Use Development Projects. And this is a somewhat involved flow chart. Let's zoom in a little bit, but it shows you top to bottom how various land use or land development projects are analyzed depending on the type of project, the size of project, and it has these sort of decision points along the way to determine how it goes. This is very helpful, I think, for a top-down overview of how the whole process goes, but as you can see, it's quite complicated. And we thought that expecting developers to be able to look at this at a glance and say, oh yeah, we got this, we can navigate this chart no problem. We decided to take this and to turn it into a step-by-step process through our website that you can access by way of this website. And so if you go to this analysis step-by-step guide here, then it'll take you to this page. Welcome to Fresno COG's VMT Analysis Guide. The first thing it has you do is to familiarize yourself, or at least to have at your fingertips to download certain references and tools that you'll probably need as you go through this analysis for a particular project. The three main references and tools that we make are to the regional guidelines themselves. It's good to have those in your hand as you go through, because as much as we try to anticipate questions in this step-by-step guide, there's a lot of information to digest through this process that are in the guidelines. And so having the guidelines at your fingertips is very helpful. We recommend that you can view it online here, just like I did here. It'll bring it up in a tab. There's also a project screening map, which I will not be talking about, but this for smaller projects of that are either residential or office, there's a screening map that you may be able to use. Actually, it may be for all projects. I don't remember off the top of my head, so don't quote me on that. Someone who knows more than I can weigh in after I'm done. But there is a screening map that gets referenced to throughout this guide, and it helps you to know where the low VMT areas are throughout the county. Depending on what threshold you're using, you can use either 13 or 15%, depending on, and again, this depends on the jurisdiction has determined for their region. Again, these are regional guidelines, but every jurisdiction can take or modify these guidelines as they see fit. And so the buck really stops at the local jurisdiction and what they have decided is going to be their policy regarding SB743 and VMT analysis. So we have a variety of different kinds of analyses that you can look at right here. And of course, we have our VMT calculation tool. This is an Excel tool that you can download from this link. Currently on version 1.2. This will be updated as updates are made available. But anyone with Excel or an Excel-like spreadsheet program will be able to open this, and you'll be able to analyze for smaller projects and projects of a particular type, the VMT impacts. Now we talked about the agencies are really where the buck stops as far as what the definitive standards and policies and methodologies are for analyzing projects. And so the things that you will probably need to do before you even start a project is to contact the local jurisdiction and to initiate a particular project. And in doing so, you will get some information from them, such as the VMT thresholds that they use for that jurisdiction. Each jurisdiction sets VMT thresholds for each project type. They're related to the type of project as well as, the size of it, all those sort of things. So you need to make sure are we talking about 13% or 15%? Or are we talking about using the whole county region to pull average VMT, or are we looking at the average VMT from the jurisdiction itself? This is all very complicated, but the staff from the jurisdiction will be able to help guide you through what the actual threshold is for your particular project. Different projects can have different screening criteria. Projects that satisfy certain criteria, such as size, location, development type, may be eligible for screening, but again, that depends on what the jurisdiction has determined is available for screening. There are some references made to affordable housing policies. Projects that satisfy certain standards may be eligible for screening, but they vary by jurisdiction. Same with public facility and government entity use policies. There may be some screening opportunities for certain of these types of projects. Check with your jurisdiction. And there may be other jurisdiction-specific policies relevant to SB 743 that would be good to know before embarking on this journey. So once you've initiated the project and you've gone through all this, then you're ready to start analysis on the project. That's the link down here. And the first question it asks you is about initial screening. The big idea here is that certain projects, based on their size and their location, as well as the jurisdiction policies, may be eligible to be screened out and may, right off the bat, be deemed to have a less than significant impact on region-wide VMT. So if your project applies or can apply to being screened out, then that's good news for you. Some examples of projects that may be eligible are projects in high quality transit areas, projects in low VMT zones. Both of these you can go to the screening map to determine whether your project is in these areas. If it's local serving retail at less than 50,000 square feet, it may be eligible. If it's a low trip generator, which is defined as 500 or less than 500 daily trips generated. If it has a high level of affordable housing units, again, as defined by local government, this is why you check with the jurisdiction before you start. And it's an institutional government or public service use. Again, we made reference to this in the previous step. So if you satisfy one or more of these criteria, and you can click on this link and you'll get to your congratulations page. your project is likely to have a less than significant impact and no further analysis is required. So this is good news if your project happens to be eligible for screening. If not, then you click on My Project Does Not Satisfy Any of the criteria, and it takes you to step 2 of the process, which is to identify the project type. Our guidelines and the OPR guidelines specify 4 types of projects: residential projects, office projects, retail projects, and then other projects. Other could fall outside of any of these. It could be mixed-use projects, all of that. So you determine what type of project you're talking about. Let's say we're talking about a residential project. Let's open it in a new tab so that we can come back to this later. Okay, so step 3 for any project is to determine the project size. The size of the project is likely to determine how you analyze the project. In the case of residential projects, they're analyzed based on their net VMT per capita. So the number of individuals that are projected to live in the residential project, what is their VMT impacts per capita for each of those people. And that's the metric that we use. Projects with 500 units or less can be used using the VMT calculation tool, which is that Excel tool I mentioned earlier, and you can download it here again. If it's more than 500 units, then it needs to be analyzed using the Fresno COG activity-based model, which is a travel demand model that has been developed and calibrated and validated for the Fresno County region. The VMT calculation tool is meant to have a sort of equivalency with results from the activity-based model, and it was based off of the performance of that model. But it only works for projects of a certain size. Once you get to a big enough size, the regional impacts are significant enough that we need to use the activity-based model, and we have modeling staff to handle model runs here in-house, and so you'd be contacting us. Once you have the VMT results, regardless of how you got it, whether it's from the tool or from the model, you will be getting the VMT per capita for that project, and you compare it to what the threshold is, which again you should have after talking to the jurisdiction, whether it's 13 or 15% below the regional average, depending on whether the jurisdiction has accepted the rationale that 13% should be the standard for our area, or whether they would rather take the more aggressive or the more conservative, 15% below the average, which is recommended by the state. So if you're below the regional average by this amount for residential projects, then your project is deemed to have a less than significant impact, and it takes you to the same congratulations page that you had before. If it's greater than that, then we go to step 4, which is mitigation. Let's go back here to step 2 for a moment. We talked about residential projects. All of these are similar in how they operate. Let's just go through them very quickly. If it's an office project, instead of using VMT per capita, now we're looking at VMT per employee. So again, small projects for office projects can be analyzed using the VMT calculation tool. It's 375 employees or less. I know that developers typically have more of an idea of, say, square footage than necessarily the number of employees that are going to be at that location. And there are a variety of tools and methodologies that can be employed to estimate how many employees, depending on the type and the size of the project, are likely to work there. That is the onus is on the developer to come up with that rationale project by project. But you can use the tool to analyze small office projects. Projects with more than 375 employees, again, go through the activity-based model, and here are the same contact links before so that we at COG can run the model for you. Again, it's the same threshold analysis. You need to be either 13 or 15% below the regional average, depending on what jurisdiction you're working with. And if it's less than that, then you pass. Less than significant impact, this is good news for you. If it's greater than, then you talk about mitigation. It goes to the same page here. For retail projects, it's a little different. All retail projects, unless you're talking about small locally serving retail, which is defined as less than 50,000 square feet, and is deemed locally serving. If it doesn't follow those screening criteria, then you need to use the activity-based model. You can't use the VMT tool for retail projects. And instead of there being a threshold of either 13 or 15% for retail, the way that it's put together is the total regional VMT cannot increase due to the project. So that's the rationale there. That's the threshold for retail projects. And if regional VMT decreases or stays the same with your project in place, then it's less significant. If it causes it to increase, then we may have mitigating factors. And finally, we have other type projects, which like retail, needs to be analyzed with the activity-based model alone. So the VMT tool is only used exclusively for residential and office projects. Activity-based model has to be used for large residential and office projects or any other type of projects. And then the applicable threshold depends on the jurisdiction. And again, it depends on whether it's consistent with the general plan or whether it requires a general plan amendment. If it's consistent with the general plan, then it's similar to retail projects where, it must produce VMT, no, I'm sorry, I take that back. If it's consistent with general plan, they must produce VMT per employee that is less than or equal to the regional average. If it requires a general plan amendment, it must produce a VMT that is less than either 13 or 15% below the average, same as a residential or office project. So I think that gives us an idea. Before we talk about mitigation, I'm noticing some things flashing on chat. I'm wondering if we have questions that we should answer here.
Yeah, Seth, if I can go over the questions that we have received so far, and then
yeah, this is a good time to do that.
Yeah, I think we have received quite a few. So let me go over them. Hold on. So the first question I have is it required that a city council take action to adopt a VMT methodology, or can the city simply default to using COG's methodology if it so chooses? I would say the council has to adopt it, but I'll have Tony and Christine confirm that.
Yeah, let me, I was just writing a very lengthy and nuanced response in the chat, so let me just say this. As of July 1st, the new CEQA guidelines are in effect and should be implemented. An agency does not have to adopt a threshold by city council action at that time. The presumption, though, is in the absence of formal recommendation that agency will revert to the guidance that had been provided by the Office of Planning and Research in their December technical advisory. However, should a local agency embark on a CEQA document after that time, they are free to create their own thresholds at the time that CEQA document was started. If that agency, though, departs from the OPR guidance or would choose to depart from the work that the COG has established and embark on their own way of going on things, they need to make sure that they provide substantial evidence to support why those thresholds are being done. From the point forward that an agency then entertains additional projects and environmental documents, they should use that very same process that was initially undertaken in the first example. So the nuanced answer is no, but the practical answer is you would be somewhat foolish not to adopt a formal guidance so that you keep yourself in a better legal standing. The work of the COG provides the agencies some measure of substantial evidence. Everything is litigable in court, but provides some measure of substantial evidence so that, and if all the agencies act in a unified manner, then that provides even greater support. So that's a long-winded answer to that question, and I apologize for that. I'll get rid of my long-winded response in the chat too.
Thank you, Tony. The next question is, if a city does not take action to adopt a VMT threshold, they default to OPR's threshold of 15%. I would say yes, that is the case. If you don't adopt COG recommendation of 13%, and which also has been provided with substantial evidence in the report that's uploaded in the COG website, then you would have to, default back to OPR's threshold of 15%. The next one, this is a good one, is retail. Everything that sells something or a service too. There is very little definition in OPR guidance of how they classify retail. I would say that this will be up to the local agency to decide and categorize a project, whether it's pure retail or retail plus some service. If it is considered as service, then what sets showed as other projects category, that is the criteria that needs to be used to analyze VMT for that project. But if it is, if the local jurisdiction accepts the fact that it is just purely retail, then the retail approach could be taken. The next question is, if the city decides to endorse the entire guideline, they can do that, which means the city...
No, that's Christine's response.
Yeah, that was my response.
I'm just reading the one. Okay. Okay, the next one is the screening threshold for 500 ADPs uses 1,300 by 3,000 metric ton CO2 per year as a proxy threshold. If we use that threshold, would jurisdictions need to adopt that same the metric ton threshold as well, augmenting the 29% reduction from BAU threshold the air district uses?
This is our air quality specialists at LSA have informed us that when doing air quality and GHG studies, these are the standards that are applied to determine whether or not something rises to a significant impact. And so it's not a standard to be adopted. It is a white line that the practitioners in CEQA use to say whether or not a GHG impact has been triggered. So it is a trigger that practitioners and specialists use. I would point out too that the 500 ADT is less than half of that amount of CO2 equivalents per year. So the thought being that at any project, about 40% of the CO2 equivalents are from mobile sources. The other are from operations at that facility, HVAC, whatever else is going on there. So we are providing an extremely comfortable and conservative estimate of an ADT threshold, something that was absent from the OPR technical advisory, where they just used a CEQA exemption.
And just to add to what Tony just said, what we have found out through our air quality research is that you can go as high as up to probably 1,500 daily trips. COG and the technical committee and us, we all mutually decided to keep it at the more conservative level. The reason why we came down to 500 was that typically you would require a traffic study in the LOS world for 50 peak hour trips, which translates to 500 daily trips. So kind of keeping that same correlation or logic, it was decided that a more conservative number, which is 500 ADT, be adopted as the daily trip threshold. But there are agencies around the state, for example, SANDAG in San Diego. SANDAG is recommending 1,000 daily trips as the threshold. There are some which have gone all the way up to 1,500 daily trips. So this, the basis for this daily trip threshold being deviating away from OPR is what Tony just mentioned. It's based on that correlation between trips and GHG emissions. And it could be a much higher number, but we decided to keep it at 500 based on the previous logic of doing LOS studies. There's another question. City of Kerman has adopted the 13%.
That's not a question.
Oh, okay.
All right, are we ready to get back to the demonstration of the website?
Yeah. Okay, we are
Great.
done for now. Yes.
All right, feel free to add more questions in chat as they arise. I wanted to point out, by the way, along the way, we have these various links. Many of them go to the guidelines themselves, and we have bookmarks set up so that they go directly to the part of the guidelines that is relevant to this discussion. So for instance, right here, we're talking about less than 13 or 15% below the regional average. Click here for more information. In the guidelines, there is a table here that shows by jurisdiction, depending on whether we're talking about residential or office projects, what region we're talking about, whether we're talking about the region being Fresno County or the region being the local jurisdiction. There are various data here that indicate what those thresholds are in real numbers, either VMT per capita or VMT per employee over on this side. And so if you got from the jurisdiction that we have adopted 13% and we're using Fresno County as the region for residential projects, you would go Fresno County as the region, 13% threshold for that jurisdiction, and here's that number. It's 14 for all jurisdictions because we're using Fresno County as the region. As you see, if you go over here, if the local jurisdiction is the region, it varies by jurisdiction. And so this is sort of a lookup table that you can go to help determine what that threshold is in real numbers, so that when you get the results from the VMT analysis, you know what threshold we're looking at. So there are little helpful links all along the way that sort of help you if you need a little bit more information. It'll take you to the relevant part of the guidelines that talk about that specific problem or that specific issue. For any of these 4 project types, residential, office, retail, or other, if your if you've exceeded your VMT threshold as far as the project's impact to the region, then it takes you to step 4, which is mitigation. Your project is, in this case, is deemed to have a significant impact on region-wide VMT and will likely require the implementation of 1 or more mitigation measures. Here's a link that takes you to the part of the report that talks about mitigation, which is a very lengthy and complicated issue, and I recommend that that everyone give this part a read because it's rather nuanced. Examples of mitigation measures that are likely relevant to Fresno County can be found in this table from the regional guidelines. So there's a table here which is very detailed that gives you some examples that may or may not be applicable to your project and some idea of the sort of impacts they may have to the regional VMT of that project. So again, pretty complicated stuff. This is a good part of the guidelines, I think, to read cover to cover, just to get a handle on how the mitigation applies to these projects that are deemed to have significant impact. Once you have identified and quantified which mitigation measures, if any, can be implemented in conjunction with the project, you may continue the analysis. So the mitigation measures that are taken on for projects may reduce the impact of that project to a less than significant level, which is good news. in which case it takes you, I think, to the same page. Yeah, you got the congratulations page. Tried to get it so that fireworks happen on this page, but it's beyond my skill as an HTML programmer. And if mitigation fails to reduce the project impact to a less than significant level, if you can't mitigate your way out of it, then your project may represent a significant unmitigable impact, which would require an EIR as appropriate and a statement of overriding consideration. Alternately, the project may be rescoped to meet SB743 VMT requirements. So essentially, if you get to this point after going through all 4 steps and the project still has a significant impact, then this is the end of the road for you. We have more information from the report here where it talks about what the statement of overriding consideration looks like and what that means. But that is the entire guide, start to finish. And it looks like we have some more questions that have come through, and I think it's a good time to answer some of those.
I think I already did. There is a lookup table from Mr. Rowland's Peter, or from Mr. Rowland, is our analysis for the COG supporting the 500 daily trips available. Yes, there is a lookup table that goes all the way to 1,500 trips, I believe, in the implementation study that's present on the COG website. Summarize how the VMT per capita thresholds are determined. Both the VMT per capita and per employee thresholds are detailed in the implementation study, but said simply, what we did was collaboratively established that the county was going to be defined as the region. That was the first step. Then we assembled and aggregated the analysis zones from the activity-based model by use, summarized the VMT profiles for all of those zones by use, divided those by the appropriate denominator, be it residential population or employment population, to arrive at the VMT for the county for those different purposes, and then did an analysis of the 15%, the 13%, the by city, by region without the parks and monuments. We did a whole series of sensitivities on behalf of the COG, and those were presented in a series of 3 or 4 meetings. But all of that, again, is provided for in the implementation study on the COG's website. We haven't yet got to mitigation, but yes, there is some indication of the percent reduction for each measure. There's a comment, when you say by use, are we referring to what's actually on the ground or what is proposed in an agency's general plan? Let's be very clear. The law says that the comparative is to be the existing regional MT average. Therefore, these are the summarization of the existing use. This is not a comparative to a future condition. There is a discussion in OPR's guidance on future and cumulative analyses, and we have been consistent with that approach. No, and then there's a question, if you disaggregated the original TAZs by use, you must have ended up with a lot of new TAZs. No, in fact, we use the original TAZ structure. Okay.
All right, I think if that's the end of the questions, I believe that concludes my portion of the presentation. I believe I handed over to Christine, or I don't remember exactly who takes over from here, but I'll hand it over to Christine.
And Barish, I think.
Oh,
yep.
To Amberish. There you have it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Seth, can you stop sharing your screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. So as Seth went through the entire step-by-step process, and you all, I think it's a lot of information at the very outset, but it's very helpful the way it's set up on the COG website. As a project comes in, the step-by-step analysis is pretty well laid out in the website itself, so that you don't have to go through all the detailed write-ups and everything that's in the technical documents. It's a very good summary of the entire process. And thank you, Seth and Christine, for setting that up for everyone. So one of the key steps, which was step 2 in Seth's process, was project screening. There is a host of criteria that you can use to screen projects based on project size, project location, and things like that. One of the options was using a screening tool, which is basically a map-based tool, which you can use to see in which area your project is located within the county. What I mean by that is basically that screening tool provides the VMT profile of each TAZ, or even by parcels. And I will get into the tool in a minute. I'm just providing an overview of what that tool is supposed to do. So you can, if you know the TAZ or the project location or the APN number, you can go in and use the tool to check and see if it's in a low VMT area or a medium or a high VMT area. One of the approach to screen out project is that if a project comes in and is within a low VMT zone, you can screen out that project. There are some caveats to it though, and I'll get to it in a minute or in a moment after I present the tool. So I will share my screen here. Just give 1 minute. So I'm back to the Fresno COG website, and like Seth mentioned, there's a link to the screening tool over here. If you click on that, it takes you to the tool itself. You can open.
Darsh, can you share your screen?
Oh, I thought you were. Are you not able to see my screen?
No.
Oh, hold on. Okay, can you see it now? Can you see the screen?
Yes, 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 we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So what I was saying is, if you go to that website, the one that Seth showed, there is a link to the screening tool. It's the link over here. I'm just going to open it up on a new window, and it takes you to an ArcGIS online-based interface. You can open this up on any browser. This should be working. You can open it up on a Mac or even on your tablet. That should not be an issue. So once you get into the screening tool, I'll quickly run through how this tool is set up. On the top left, you have the search button where you can type in the address, or there's a button that's over here which says APN number. So if you know the APN number, you can search by APN number. And then depending on the category that we are trying to use for the screening tool, you have the legend showing that right now. And those categories are listed over here on the top right. So if you click on each one, you will see the first one that's there by default is basically category is employment. You're looking at the employment category with the region being the county and threshold being 13%. If you may recall, for employment, we can only use the county as the region and not the city. So for employment, we only have two selections or options here. If you want to use the 13% threshold with the county as the region, then the button that's currently in there is the one you will use. Otherwise, you can switch over to the 15%, and it will show you the corresponding VMT profile for 15% threshold. I'll go to the residential ones in a minute, but let me zoom in to show you how this tool actually works. So let's say I'm zooming in. You see this brown boundaries. These are all TAZs that comes from the ABM. If you click on any particular TAZ, it will give you the information that's included in that TAZ, the TAZ number, what the jurisdiction, whether it falls in a high quality transit. Remember, high quality transit was one of your screening criteria. Then it provides you the average VMT per employee for the TAZ itself, what it is for the county, and then whether it's what type of VMT generator. Let me quickly define this VMT generator. You see this on the legend to your left as well. Low VMT generator for here, this one we are taking 13% as our threshold. So any TAZ which is equal to 13 or less than 13% is a low VMT generator. So a project can be screened out if it's in a zone like this one. A medium VMT zone is something which is between that 13% below to 13% above the regional average. And then anything greater than 13% of the regional average is a high VMT zone. You may wonder why we actually created that medium and just not categorize them as low and high. The reason being, if you are in a medium zone, there is a potential that you may be able to mitigate the impact. And I use the word may with a lot of caution here, but you still do have a chance of mitigating the project's impact. If you get into a high VMT zone, what we have found out based on our research and looking at projects at other places in the state, if you're in a high VMT zone, it's almost near to impossible to mitigate a VMT impact. That may change down the road, depending on how new mitigation measures are devised. But it's a very new topic, and there's a lot of discussions going on statewide. So that's why we have categorized them as high, medium, and low. And then in here, like I was explaining, you get all these information in the tool, and there are some notes on the definitions and what all the assumptions are for this particular category. Like I said, and one other thing is this shaded area is what we are calling the high quality transit areas. If I go to the residential side, you see there are these 4 buttons over here. I hope you can see my mouse as I'm hovering them on those buttons. There are these 4 are for residential projects. The reason we have 4 is for residential project, you have an option of either selecting the city as the region or the county as the region. So the first 2 are where you can, which is using the city as the region. And then, like I was saying, 13 means 13% threshold, 15 means 15% threshold. The next 2 are using county as the region, and then the same options of 13 and 15. The reason we have kept all these options in the tool are so that whatever you decide to adopt as your guidelines in your particular jurisdiction, this tool can serve everybody depending on whatever permutation and combination of thresholds you are selecting. So, which is why Fresno COG decided that let's keep all the options for everybody, and then you pick and choose whatever you want to look at or whatever your thresholds are, and depending on that, you use the screening tool to screen out projects. There is a link to a user manual over here. If you click on it, it will open up a PDF of the document. which has a lot more detail of each of the buttons, the tool buttons and how you go step by step and use it. The other thing also is today's presentation. I'll just give me 1 minute. Let me pull that up. In today's presentation, we have actually included slides, which is a very high-level summary of the screening tool and the buttons that are there in the tool. You can use this as well, just to understand how the tool works. So you have various options. You can use this presentation. You can click on the user guide, or I think the tool itself also presents quite a bit of information. There is an info button here also, which talks or provides a lot more information about all the assumptions and the definitions in the tool. So you can get that from here as well. So that is pretty much so. The one other thing I forgot to show here is if you zoom in further, the TAZs will go away. And now you can see the map at a parcel level. So if you know the specific parcels that you're looking at, you can click on that parcel and you will get the information for that individual parcel as well. So there's this multitude of options being provided in the tool, whichever way you want to check out projects and see if you can screen them out. You can use that to screen out projects. With that, are there any questions for the screening tool?
Amber, I just want to reaffirm something with you. So this low VMT screening map, or this screening map, can only be applied to residential and office projects, right? Would it work?
Christine, you are cutting off.
For retail, would it work? Oh, okay. Is it better?
Yeah, it is better now. Yeah.
Okay. So my question was, is this tool, can this tool be applied to other projects than office and residential? Or is it just for office and residential?
Thanks, Christine. That's a good question. I forgot to mention that. Yes, you cannot apply this tool for retail because the approach for retail is different. If we are looking at total VMT, net change in VMT without and with the retail. So you cannot use it for retail. Residential and office, definitely you can. You can use it for other employment-based projects. But because OPR has been so unclear about that, we will caution you when you are using. What I mean by other employment-based projects is, let's say you are adding a logistics center. A logistics center is not a typical office. It supports as storage plus a lot of. There may be quite a lot of employees, but you may want to still verify a project like that through the ABM. And not just solely rely on the screening tool. But if you are looking at single family, multifamily, regular office projects, yes, the screening tool is perfectly fine for those. The other caveat that I will add to, and I see a question here from Sophia. Thank you, Sophia, for bringing that up, is if you have a project that's a general plan amendment or a zone change, and you're increasing the intensity of that zone or TAZ or the parcel that we're looking at, you may not be able to screen out the project using the screening tool, even though if it's in a low VMT zone. But again, that will be up to the local jurisdiction to determine, depending on the project description, whether such kind of a project will or will not be eligible to be screened out using the tool. So that's another caveat. The other big, I would say, thing to remember is the project size. Because let's say I am in a TAZ, which is a low VMT zone, but I'm bringing in 1,000 homes. Now, which is why we have the same caveat in the calculation tool, which we will get to it after the break. But what I want to say here is that when a project of a certain size comes in, that has the potential to significantly alter the traffic pattern of that area or the region, then you would prefer to take a deeper look at that project before deciding to whether to screen it out or not. I usually draw a correlation when I talk about this using our old days of LOS approach. Even when we used to do LOS analysis, a project of a certain size would be required to be evaluated through a detailed LOS analysis, even if it's consistent with the general plan or a specific plan or whatever plan we are talking about. And so the same would apply here if it is a project of certain size and it's even if it's located in a green zone or a low VMT zone, you may have to think about whether to allow it to be screened out through the screening map. So that's another caveat. Yeah, I think those are the ones I can remember.
So Amber, did you just say that if a project, even if it's in the green zone, but if it's a general plan amendment, then it's probably prudent to not to use this tool?
If it's a general plan amendment, I would recommend, and there can be two kinds of general plan amendments, right? One scenario is where you are increasing the intensity or the amount of traffic it's producing. The other kind is like I'm actually reducing the intensity. So if I'm increasing the intensity, then I would say that the tool may not be sufficient substantial evidence to actually allow the project to be screened out, because when in the SQL world, you need to provide enough substantial evidence to justify that. But if it's decreasing the intensity, lowering the amount of trips being generated compared to what the general plan has, I think you would still be fine using the screening tool as the criteria. And if you...
There is one other caveat that I would suggest to answer some of Sophia's questions, and we talked about this with the city. If a development project is coming in that is clearly a regional draw, a high generator, and it looks as though it would fit within one of the green TAZs, it probably still needs a VMT analysis. For example, if you're putting in a Walmart in a green zone, chances are that's a regional draw, and you're going to exceed the VMT just by virtue of the use itself, not the locational specificity. So local agencies should, just check to make sure that what is going into the zones is roughly equivalent to or similar in constitution to that which is in that zone in the first place. If you've got something that is a regional draw, something that could in fact create a high VMT, you might want to have a more detailed analysis for purposes of a CEQA disclosure.
Yeah, and then there's one question also about mixed-use projects. I think that's also a very good question. Mixed-use projects usually in the VMT world tend to work better, which was one of OPR's goals, is to have more of a mix of uses rather than individual uses. If you have a decent mix of uses, because sometimes what happens is you're proposing 300 homes and just 5,000 square feet of retail and call that out as mixed use, but that's not mixed use. If you have a proper proportion of mixed use between residential, office, retail, or whichever that mix is, again, it will come down to the local jurisdiction to decide, but yes, you may be able to screen out that project if it's in a green zone. But that's a good question. Yeah, absolutely.
And I would say the answer to that is no, that project likely would not be screened out because it includes multifamily office. The retail being less than 50% is not enough to screen the entire project out.
But one thing I would like to state here, and this is based on our experience working on actual projects throughout the state, is more often than not, if you're in a green zone, even if I have to do a VMT analysis and the project is, an average project, it's not a giant project, what we have seen is the project is getting, even through the VMT analysis, it's getting screened out. So this map, although is showing you a screening option, but it's also providing a lot of information to applicants and developers and consultants that depending on where you're located in the region, what is the probability that you will have a VMT impact? So I think it also serves that purpose, even if you're not able to directly screen out a project. And we have seen this ourselves elsewhere in the States. I just wanted to bring that up. So
Move on to the next.
Any more questions? There's another question. For the mixed use example, might the residential and retail be screened? Well, it will. No worries, Ken. I think we got your question. I think, again, it will depend on the project size and location. If you have a small residential component and the retail is local serving less than 50,000 square feet, you may be able to screen it out. It will depend on local jurisdiction, obviously. That's the only thing. I mean, some jurisdictions, depending on what they decide to adopt as the threshold, that will kind of drive your final, determination of VMT impacts. So, Christine, it's 2:15 now. Do we take a 10-minute break and come back and start with the VMT calculator tool and then the mitigations?
Sure. Yes, we can.
Okay, so everyone will come back at 2:25 and restart our discussion. And the next thing we will be getting into is the VMT calculator tool. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
See you later.
So, hi everyone. I hope everybody is back now. So this second part of our workshop today, we are going to talk about the VMT calculation tool. This one, the purpose of this tool, as Christine and Seth mentioned, is to help small size residential and office projects to calculate the project's VMT using the calculation tool, especially the projects that are not being able to be screened out, but are not large enough that it requires an analysis through the ABM. Like I mentioned, similar to the screening tool here, we have included some slides in the PowerPoint today, which Christine will be sharing with all participants, but that has kind of a simplified guide of the calculation tool. There is also a detailed guide embedded in the tool itself, plus the COG website also will have a link to a PDF document of the detailed VMT calculation tool guide. Let me start again. I will share my screen here just to show you what I'm talking about. So this is the VMT calculation tool interface. By the way, you all can see my screen, right? Okay, thank you. So this is the interface of the tool, and I'll bring up the Excel in a minute. But we have kind of broken down the tool into subsections just for easier understanding for you when you're using it. And the subsequent slides kind of go in order of explaining what you need to include in each one of these sections. So with that, I will bring over the tool here. So this tool, just to let you know, it's available on the COG's website over here. If you click on this, you can download the tool onto your desktop. It's an Excel-based tool. So if you have Microsoft Office on your computers, you should be able to use it. It works fine on all Windows-based machines. I'll just give a caveat here. We are having some issues on Mac machines, but we are trying to figure it out so that even Mac machines are able to use the tool. So going back to the tool itself, I will start with the title here for a minute. The reason that is important is right now we are at what we are calling version 1.2. The reason we decided to give a version number to this tool is that although this is the first final look of the tool you are all seeing, COG and LSA will continue monitoring the tool and improving the tool to add more features as necessary. So when that happens, the version number will be updated, and the newer version will also be available on COG's website. One thing I do want to mention that you may all have a question is, Are the results going to change when the version number changes? I would say no, because the VMT, the calculation of the VMT is not something that we are going to change unless there is any update to the activity-based model itself. So the VMT calculations will remain the same. When I say improvements, there may be improvements to mitigations or improvements to some other features that you see on the tool, or even to the output report. But the fundamental calculations in this tool will not change until the model gets updated. On the left-hand side of your screen, where you see the project information, basically you're going to enter your project name. For example, I say test over here. You have a scroll down menu of jurisdiction. You can pick any jurisdiction depending on where the project is. It lists all the 16 jurisdictions, which is within the Fresno COG area. For example, if we pick Coalinga, then once you pick the jurisdiction, you have an option of picking the project by either the TAZ ID or the APN ID. If you click on the TAZ ID, all TAZs that are in Coalinga will pop up on this scroll down list, and you can pick any TAZ that you want. Or if you switch over to the APN number, it takes a little while because that's a lot of numbers in a jurisdiction. But then you also, if you know the APN number, if you start typing it in, you will see the corresponding APN being selected from here. So I'll stick to TAZ for now, because that probably will be easier to explain to all of you. So for example, we pick TAZ ID, let's say 324. Once I do that, this project location map here gets updated. It kind of takes you to an approximate location of where that TAZ is located. It would have been good if we could have shown the TAZ boundary also, but it requires some licensing requirements, which we don't have. But at least it gives you an approximate idea of where the project is located. Once you get to that, the other thing you notice probably happening is on your right-hand side, you see these bar lines show up. The 10.6 is the Coalinga average. Remember, for residential, you can either use the city as the average or the county as the average, depending on what Coalinga decides to pick. But in this graph, you see both the city and the county average. For the non-residential side, which is office in this particular case, you only have that option of county as the average, which is 25.6. And then again, you will see also these numbers. If you go back to the screening tool, for example, and you go to TAZ 324, you will see these average numbers in the screening tool as well. So they're the same numbers, the averages. Then once I pick the TAZ, now I dive into the project land use. Like we have said before, the tool itself is only built for calculating VMT for single family, multifamily, and office. So here we would want to add this caveat here. You see, we have made that note in the tool itself, tool interface, that for residential projects, you can analyze up to 500 dwelling units, for office up to 375 employees. This tool, all the background information is being fed from the ABM. So the VMT profile and everything is based on calculations being done in the ABM. We ran at least 100 test scenarios in the ABM to validate and calibrate the tool. Like we said, all this will be documented in a technical documentation that we are still working on, and it eventually will be uploaded on the COG's website on that same web page which showed to all of you. So now if we dive into, let's say, a residential project. Let's say it's 100 dwelling units. As soon as I type that in, you see this portion of the bar chart gets filled out. It shows what the TAZ profile is. So this is just so that you are not getting confused. 16.1 was the county average. 10.6 is your city average. 8.7 is the TAZ profile, VMT profile, the base TAZ profile where the project is going in. By virtue of adding 100 residential units, it stays at 8.7. I will get to the project plus TDM in a minute when I go through the TDM programs. If we keep changing the number of residential units, let's say we change 100 to 250, you would see that there is a slight decrease in the number in the VMT per capita, which is consistent with what we have seen everywhere in the state happening, and even in the ABM. That shows that you add more density in an area, your VMT per capita kind of starts going down. It keeps going down up to a certain level, but then as you keep adding more and more, it kind of turns back up. And that is where that question about where we should cut off the tool and go back to the ABM comes into picture. So that's about the density factor that influences the results in the tool. One other difference that you would see is, for example, instead of 250 single family, if I type in 250 multifamily, you have a lower VMT profile compared to single family, which is expected to happen. So instead of 8.6, now we have 7.2, which is based on how apartments or multifamily dwelling units tend to have lower trip lengths compared to single family homes. Again, this is all coming from our calculations through the ABM that we did. There is another factor that's added in. We could have called this out as a mitigation feature measure, but we decided to keep that option as part of the project description itself, which is the percentage of affordable housing being provided as part of the project. Remember, this option can only be selected for multifamily. For obvious reasons, it's not applicable for single family projects. So if I add some percentage affordability here, let's say we add 25% affordable housing as part of this project. So once I type that, you can see the difference. Now 7.2 goes down to 7, which also is based on a statewide research that was done for affordable housing and its influence on VMT per capita. That research paper has been cited in our technical document. You will find that link over there. The statewide research actually did calculations based on different counties and regions of the state, one of which was Fresno. And we took the information that that paper had found for Fresno and applied that to the tool. So the percentage reduction we are applying is not a average statewide reduction percentage. It is specific to what is applicable to the Fresno region. So that is about multifamily and affordable housing percentage. Just to show you a quick example of office, if we have 200 employees, you can see the TAZ profile, 5.4. With the 200 employees, it's now 4.3. So it's way below the county average of 25.6. You can try this out with other jurisdictions and see the results that you're getting for individual projects. That is so far this part of the tool here. I would also want to highlight here the fact that we had provided an option of selecting the region. Like we mentioned, as an individual jurisdiction, you will have the opportunity to select what you want to use as your threshold. So if Qualinga decides to use county as the threshold, then they would, a project going in and doing this analysis in Qualinga will just select this option. The way this affects the analysis is in the report. So I'll quickly take you to the report page here, report tab, and you see over here, the results of the VMT is showing up, but it is showing up only the county average because I picked county as the region. If I switch that to city in your report, now you will see the city as the region. Actually, this doesn't get updated, but it will show the city as the region over here. And then also the threshold option. You can pick 13 or 15 depending on what your options are, and or threshold percentages. If 13% is the threshold, you don't have to worry about 15 at all. But then depending on that, the report will tell you whether it's a significant impact or not. So it's using two criteria to determine your impact. One is the region, and the second is the threshold percentage. So
Ambrish, do you want to describe what the TDM feature is?
I haven't gone there yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll go there in a minute. So that's more or less what from a VMT per capita standpoint calculation is. Now let's go back to the single family example that I was showing before, and when I talk about TDM again. So we had said 250 homes, single family homes in this particular TAZ 324, which gives you 8.6, a reduction from 8.7 to 8.6 as the project TAZ per VMT per capita. I'm sorry, project VMT per capita. Now, what we have further done is we did some extensive analysis of available mitigation measures for which we have local information available. What I mean by that is you may have seen in the technical documentation that we have in one of the appendices a list of like 70 or 80 mitigation measures. A lot of majority, unfortunately, of those mitigation measures, at least of now, there is not sufficient information available to apply specific percentage reductions for the Fresno region. The way that we envision that to happen is there is most likely going to be further research and documentation done to collect more data to come up with specific percentage reductions for a lot of those mitigation measures. But there are a few that we identified for which we were able to collect local information and come up with appropriate reduction percentages. I will go back to this tab, list of mitigations, and I'll come back to TDM programs in a minute. So those are listed at the top here. The first 6 are mitigation measures where we were able to find local information. I will talk about these transit ones first, and then come back to carpool and vanpool. For the transit improvements, we obtained ridership data. We had sufficient information available in the ABM that we were able to code in these example projects in the ABM and find out corresponding reduction percentages. Whether you add a BRT line or whether you expand a BRT line, whether you add a new transit or expand transit. And all those corresponding percentage reductions are included in the technical documentation that will be uploaded. The reason we did not include that in the tool is because in the tool, we are only talking of project-specific mitigation measures. Based on what we discussed and reviewed, we found that for a project to add transit or BRT line is not a feasible mitigation. That may have to happen through a regional fee program into a transit improvement project or something like that. So that will not be a project will not go in and add a transit line. They probably won't be able to do that, which is why we didn't include it in the tool itself. The ones we included are something that is feasible to be done by the project. For example, van pool or carpool. When I say van pool typically is implemented by employment centers, not by the residential projects. And we did quite a bit of research also on this to find out what is being done elsewhere. And there is substantial data available that van pool programs should be restricted to office projects only, office or other employment-based projects only, which is why we have specified over here in our TDM program that van pool should be only limited to office. And then the way you would select van pool is by percentage of expected participants, what I mean by that is, let's say you have 100 employees and you say 10% are expected to participate in a van pool program. That 10%, the percentage is what you're going to include here as part of your TDM program. Since we are looking at a single family can participate in carpool programs. There also, it's percentage of expected participants. So when I say, let's say I have 10% expected participants, I need to click on this box here first. And I say 10% is going to participate in carpool. You see further reduction in your project VMT, VMT per capita number based on what you add for carpool. One of the things that we also tested out is if you have everybody, for example, it will probably never happen, but if let's say 100% of the population in a development is participating in carpool, you see it drops down to a very low number, but it will never get to zero because you still have half of the people driving at least one car. And then when we switch over to van pool, we can test out a similar scenario for van pool. For example, I have 100 employees and I have 10% participating in van pool. I have to click that box and you see there is a reduction in due to van pool that's happening. Drops down from 4.8 to 3.7. So just to let you all know, carpool and van pool, we have very detailed data available in the Fresno region. We received that information from COG actually, and then COG staff and us went over those. You have specific location-based carpool, van pool information. What I mean by that is you have the origin and destination points from where people are starting and where they are ending. We looked at it based on regional trip lengths because we have the OD information. And so the reason I'm mentioning this here is because we did not want to take an average trip length reduction. What I mean by that is somebody carpooling in Fresno versus somebody carpooling from Coalinga or Kerman may have a different trip length profile compared to somebody who is carpooling in an urban area. So that is incorporated in the tool. And so the variation in trip length reduction based on from where you are starting your trip and where typically those trips have ended, as shown in, or not shown, but as we received information from that database, that was used to calculate all of these reduction percentages. And like I said, all these will be documented in the technical documents. If you want to go into further detail, if you're curious to know about exactly how these were done, all of those will be documented and you will have that information. There is a clear all option if you want to start over again. That clears everything that I just did and you can restart. There is an instructions link that will take you to this instructions tab, which is basically the same thing as the guide, user guide. So here you have all the not only the instructions, but it also talks about limitations and further where you can find further information. It has the link to the COG website, that the one that Seth showed, where you can find the regional guidelines and all the other documentation. There is an option of here on the top left that takes you back to the main interface, which was this. And that's pretty much the overview of the tool. Do you have any questions?
Oh, Ambarsh, there's a question in the checkbox.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. We did discuss about this. Let me read the question out. Will the APNs be coordinated with updates from county assessor? The APNs get updated from time to time. We did discuss about that. We have, and we are still discussing this internally between COG and us, is whether we should be periodically updating the APN database in the tool just to reflect the most updated APN numbers, which is why we gave both options here, TAZ and APN. That way the tool continues to function if you know the TAZ ID. One of the options you can do is, if you know, let's say, where the project is located, or if you know the address, you can always, I know it's not super user-friendly, but that's an option you can take. If you don't know the TAZ number, you can go to the screening tool and type in the address of the project. It will take you to the TAZ where that project is located. And each parcel has also the corresponding TAZ number within which this parcel is located. So this is kind of a back calculating way of finding out if for some reason the APN number has changed, but you know the project location, you can come back to the screening tool and still be able to find out the TAZ number. And then you go back to your Excel here and type in the TAZ numbers or use the scroll down list. Sophia, you said, can you please walk us through the report in more detail? Yeah, so let me type in a project again. Let's use one in Fresno. We will pick, let's say 477. Not a good one, 470. These are probably in the outskirts. Okay, 491. So this is a zone. So Fresno, as far as I know, has adopted county as the region for residential projects. This particular project, the TAZ that it is in, 491, has a TAZ base VMT per capita profile that's higher than the county average. We will take again 250 single family homes. So you have a profile of 18.1, a little lower than the base. And I'm using county as the average and 13% as the threshold, which both is what Fresno has adopted. And so if I go back to the report here, I would see I have the project name, I have the jurisdiction, I have the TAZ ID. Over here, it's a single family residential project, so I have this filled out. Obviously, there is no affordable housing here because it's not multifamily. I haven't implemented any carpool or van pool so far. And at the very bottom is my summary of the result. It says project VMT per capita 18.1 is greater than county VMT per capita of 14, using 13% as the threshold. And then whether it's a significant impact, yes. And we haven't done any TDM yet, so it's still a yes. If we were to add now, let's say 15% carpool to this project, it brings it down to 17. And the report gets updated here. Now you have after TDM 17, but it still continues to be an impact. And over here, you see this getting added. TDM measure, carpool, yes, 15% carpool for participants. Per capita reduction is 5.7. So once you do that here, the report gets updated here. So, Sophia, I hope that that answers your question. So there is this question, can the tool generate VMT for a future horizon year as well? The answer is no. And that is because not only OPR, but even Fresno COG and us, we reviewed the VMT guidance, and the VMT analysis is supposed to be done based up on top of the baseline conditions, which is existing, and not using the future scenario, especially for land use projects, which is the tool, what the tool is meant for. If you're looking at plans or transportation projects, what I mean by plans is general plans or specific plans, or transportation capacity enhancement projects, then you will be running DAVM to calculate the future, which is 2035 in the model right now, VMT per capita, and for transportation, it's total VMT, and comparing it to the base, and that increase or decrease will determine whether you have an impact or not. I think, Tony, you wanted to add something here.
Yeah, if I could, I'm referring back to the OPR guidance document, and this is the reason why we have done what we have done. On page 6 of that December 2018 document, OPR provides guidance on cumulative impacts, and they speak to the use of what's called an efficiency-based threshold, or the rate-based, which is what we have, a per capita or per employee rate-based. And it says, a project that falls below an efficiency-based threshold that is aligned with long-term goals and relevant plans has no cumulative impact distinct from the project impact. So if you do not have an impact in the base year, the presumption is that because you're as a per capita, per employee, that relationship is the same going into the future. And therefore, you wouldn't have a cumulative impact. This tool is using efficiency-based analyses, you know, the per capita and per employee. So it would be consistent to say that this, in most cases, would be the same for both an existing plus and a cumulative analysis of VMT.
There's another question here about, does the tool limit pool shares to something reasonable? Good question, actually. It's not just the pool, carpool, van pool, even for the numbers you enter for residential or not employees. That will be version 1.3, where we will be adding restrictions to what you can enter and what you cannot. Like we said, the tool is restricted to up to 500 dwelling units. Right now, if I enter more than 500, the tool will still give you a result, but ideally it should not be giving us any results. So if you enter a number like this, an error message will show up, which will request the user to enter a value less than 500. For carpool and van pool, we didn't decide to do any restrictions, just because I think even if you enter a random number between 1 and 100 as a percentage, ultimately it will be vetted out through the city. The city will be reviewing your AMT report, and if you're promising 100% carpool, you have to show some kind of substantial evidence as a project applicant that you can guarantee 100% carpool from that project. So we don't want to provide any restrictive number for carpool, van pool, but rather leave it up to both the applicant and the respective jurisdiction to decide whether the number that is being used is, first of all, reasonable, secondly, implementable, and thirdly, can be continued in perpetuity. So that's another big discussion. But
and Ambrish, I would just want to add too, for all those listening, when we first started the discussion on mitigation, we had done research that would have indicated more than 100 different strategies that could reduce VMT. Did they qualify as direct project mitigation? No, they were large-scale strategies such as implementation of full BRT, creating your own transit line and the like. I bring that up, though, to suggest in this tool, all we've presented are two TDM options. It is up to the lead agency to accept, to determine and accept whatever they find as reasonable mitigation, and to clarify the efficiency, the level of significance after that mitigation to their satisfaction. So if somebody comes and says, to offset my mitigation, I'm bringing in a fleet of flying cars, and it's going to be based on dilithium crystals, and Captain Kirk is going to be the admiral of the whole fleet, the lead agency can say whether or not they would like that as the mitigation, and it would be up to them to substantiate the fact that they will see the effectiveness of that mitigation into the future. And we'll talk more about mitigation when we get to that. But again, this tool only reflects two. It's really open to the lead agency to accept whatever they believe will be adequate mitigation and to substantiate its effectiveness.
Amber, I would like to add that so this tool is a very close approximation of COG's ABM. Actually, it takes a lot of the parameters from the ABM, but it is a more static tool compared to the ABM. So I would say the projects that using this APM, this tool should be fine. But if you find that your project VMT is very close to passing, but just barely, and you know, feel free to come talk to COG. We'll be open to talk to you about whether your project has some characteristics that are different from the task, the neighborhoods in the TAZ. And if that's the case, COG will be happy to run your project through the ABM, even if you're recommended to use this tool. So that's only if you're very close to passing, but you know that probably your project has some, your density is, the household income is very different from the neighboring communities, and household size are very different from the existing TAZs. So there's all these differences that you think your project has than the what's in the existing TAZ. Then feel free to come talk to a COG. We'll try to run the ABM for you and see whether there's anything we can help you with.
And I see here a question from David, but David, I think you figured out what you were asking, am I correct?
Another point I want to add, I think Tony probably has mentioned it, is although we only have two mitigation measures here, called pool and vent pool, that's because we have the local data that we can actually we are confident about, applying to the project-based mitigation, then you will get these VMT reductions. But you are absolutely free to use the list of mitigation measures that provided by us in the document. The only thing that we want to caution you of using that the mitigation measure, which Imbertia is going to talk about, is the VMT reduction percentage in that table actually is a range. So if you were to apply certain mitigation measure from that table and apply certain percent of VMT reduction to your project on top of what's calculated in this from this VMT tool, you need to provide some kind of evidence or justification why you're able to apply that percentage VMT reduction from the mitigation measures. Those mitigation measures are, we consider all of them are feasible in our region, except that we don't have local data really to quantify for specific.
Yeah, and thanks, Christine, for mentioning that. I mean, the mitigations Christine is talking about is this tab over here, list of mitigations. So you see the top 6, but then you have a host of other mitigation measures, up to 55 mitigations that are locally applicable, could be done in the Fresno region, but we don't have enough local data available to exactly quantify them. There are the percentages you see here are coming from various sources, mainly CAPCOA, but they are ranges that, like for example, if you're subsidizing van pool, it ranges from 0.3% to 13.4%. That's just a tremendous big range that, one way to go, and it's not just in Fresno, but elsewhere in the state also, what's started to happen is everybody has realized mitigations is the biggest unknown right now in the VMT world. I mean, while people have, to a lot of, I wouldn't say perfectly, but to a great extent, people have figured out the VMT analysis itself. But what do you do with the analysis when you have an impact is the big question that is still unanswered. One of the strategies that is being adopted statewide now is people are looking at regional VMT mitigation banks. It kind of works like a regional fee program where you have this host of improvements, whether you call it TDM measures or active transportation improvements, typical improvements that cause VMT to be lowered. You look at it at a regional level, you figure out what the funding requirements will be to implement that kind of a program, and then create a fee for implementation of that program. And then as projects come in, they just will be contributing to such kind of a fee. It is very similar to, sometimes when cities have their DIF programs for traffic or regional fee programs for paying into capital improvement projects. Something very similar along those lines.
Any other questions? If not, we can move to the mitigation.
There's a question from Kern COG. Is the VMT per capita used based on total VMT or passenger vehicle VMT?
The guidance from the Office of Planning and Research, and this was a discussion that was had in a meeting back in 2017 where Fran Inman, a California Transportation Commissioner and advocate for goods movement, started to say, what about all the freight handlers and the constitutional issues of interstate commerce? Should we be looking at distribution facilities that truck across state lines? How do you quantify that? in response to that, the guidance was updated by OPR to say that the CEQA guidelines refer only to passenger car and light duty trucks. Therefore, the calculation is for passenger car and light duty trucks. We have acknowledged and would again state to everyone, and the rationale, pardon me, and the rationale is that heavy duty trucks, other mobile sources, and diesel fuel are addressed through other regulatory means at CARB and the local air pollution control districts, as well as covered in CEQA in air quality and greenhouse gas discussions. So there is a fair argument that would suggest that the CEQA guidelines for transportation refer only to passenger cars and light duty trucks. And that's the guidance that virtually every agency across the state that we're familiar with is working with. It should be acknowledged that everything is subject to argument in a court of law. And this is one of those items where I think that there will be some discussion, and this may be where certain revisions to the guidance come up. The 13% is based, yes, on the RTP and CARB's acceptance of that. The documentation and CARB's acceptance letter is included as an appendix to the implementation plan. Mitigation?
Yeah. So I'll go to the slide. So, this brings us back to what I was talking about when I was talking about the TDM programs. The two that we included where we were able to find local information for the three transit improvements where also we had local information available, but because they are not programs that could be directly implemented by the project, we are keeping them in the list with a specific percentage reduction number that will be in the technical document report, but not throwing them into the tool. So coming back again to carpool, vanpool, like I said, there was detailed information available from local sources where we had for each trip that was being taken through a carpool or a vanpool, we had the home address or the origin address and then the destination or the employment address available. We geocoded all that information, and using the geocoded information, we found out the trip lengths that are happening from each of the individual jurisdictions from where this data was being provided. And using those trip length information, we calculated the trip reduction or trip length reduction percentages based on where the project is going in and how much carpool or vanpool trip length reduction can happen from that individual jurisdiction. So it is basically, to just simplify it, we are using the existing data where we have all this trip length data available to come up with those percentage reduction values. For transit, what we did was we added transit lines primarily within Fresno to test them out because you already have a lot of transit connectivity in downtown. But we tried it out even in some suburbs. What we were looking at in terms of transit was for a transit line to get added, we took a catchment area for that transit to identify, okay, for that catchment area, how much reduction in vehicle miles traveled will occur if a transit line is going in, or even a BRT line is going in. The catchment area, we use that OPR definition of high quality transit, which is half a mile. So we took a half a mile radius along the transit corridor and identified that as the catchment area to come up with the percentage reduction in the VMT, in the VMT per capita or VMT per employee, whatever we are looking at. So that's, kind of a very broad description of how these calculations were done. Like Christine mentioned, we did look at a lot of these other measures. We were trying to come up with specific percentages for those, but there is just not enough data available right now to quantify them. One of the ones we looked at was sidewalks and bike lanes, because that is a very easy to implement mitigation measure for most projects when they come in. But unfortunately in the Fresno area, at least for now, we don't have that information so that we can quantify, like for example, let's say a project comes in and adds 2 miles of bike lanes. How will that, or to what amount or what percentage of reduction will that result in? There are several things to think about when we are talking of bike lane reduction. That I'm just highlighting this here because the COG staff and us, we kind of went in detail to discuss about this before we decided not to include it now. But if we have some information in the future, maybe we can bring it back. So we discussed several things. One of which was, let's say I have a project going into a greenfield area in one of the suburb areas, and the project says, okay, I will add 2 miles of bike lanes. Now, if that 2 miles of bike lanes is in a desert island of bike lanes, what I mean by that is that you have 2 miles of bike lanes and then there is no bike lane. And so the bike lane doesn't actually connect to an existing bike lane facility or a bike route or something, then how much improvement does that bike lane really provide, even if the project is going to add it in? Compared to that is a different scenario where, let's say, a project comes in but ties its bike lanes into an existing bike route system where people can continue on using those, let's say, level 2 bike routes or something. Then you get an actual physical improvement happening that is noticeable. So there were these discussions that we talked about, which led us to understand that this is not a straightforward just a percentage. It will vary depending on a lot of these factors, like the one example I gave you, which is why right now we just cannot quantify them with one number. It has to be looked at if we have to come up with a percentage depending on some of these factors. So that's where we stand in terms of mitigations, and there are so many others in that list that are like that, where it is feasible over in Fresno, but they are to be quantified. We haven't quantified them yet.
And again, I would just reiterate, this is for purposes of this VMT calculation tool. If your project is such that you would collaborate with the COG and use the model, or the local agency was open to other strategies, it's up to them as the lead agency to suggest what their comfort level is with different VMT reduction strategies. I would just point out that the requirement for mitigation, there are 5 standards in the CEQA guidelines that determine what mitigation is, and the one of the fundamentals is that the mitigation reduces the impact of the project in whatever subject in perpetuity, completely. So therefore, if the suggestion is a bike share system, that bike share system is something that would have to be provided for the life of the project. If it is a van pool system, it would be a van pool system for the life of the project. So there's an endowment cost or that type of kind of planning that would have to be provided for any type of mitigation strategy.
Tony and Barish, talking about mitigation, because we have a lot that could be done, could be implemented in the region, but we're not sure about the specific VMT reduction percentage. But if the city and the developer were to look at some mitigation measure, would it be safe for them to apply the most conservative percentage that's in the spreadsheet, that in the list of mitigation measures that provided by CAPCOA?
I don't, that's a hard one to answer, Christine, and it's a very good question. I think it really would depend upon the circumstance of that project and the effectiveness of the mitigation measure. And so unfortunately, because of the high litigation probability of all of these things, it's hard to render an opinion. What we're talking, and the reason I'm being cagey, if I, in the old world, when I would suggest that you put in a left turn lane as a CEQA mitigation, you knew precisely, based on fact and observation, what the effect that left turn lane would do. 150-foot left turn lane with a 90-foot transition at a signalized intersection will roughly have anywhere from a 14 to a 1600 vehicle per hour per lane improvement to capacity, given different circumstances of the signal timing. It's fact, you know it, you can see it, and it's going to be there as long as the concrete stays in place. Here, we're talking about behavioral shifts, getting people to make changes to their behavior based upon choices that will be provided for by the development. That's a new way to look at this, and I don't think our representatives in Sacramento really thought this through. We did a project or a case study in Costa Mesa, California, where a 300-unit apartment building that didn't have a CEQA impact prior to 743 would subsequent to 743. And the offset was a bike share. Just provide bikes in the development and you would eliminate the impact. The presumption was, though, that more than 80% of the residents would have to take that bike every day. And they would have to do so 5 days a week for as long as they lived in the apartment building. Well, that's not going to happen. So we're in a new realm, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of evidence that these things will work. I'll push my soapbox out there real quickly, and then I'll take it away. When Governor Schwarzenegger, started the scoping plan and the whole climate change, ever since then, VMT has risen in the state of California. So every action that has occurred from our leaders has resulted in virtually no change. There has been a bending, but it hasn't gone down to the levels that we've said. So what you're trying to legislate behavioral changes. And that's going to be a good one for lawyers to argue in front of judges over, in my humble opinion. Soapbox put away. I'm sorry.
And you know, we talk about regional mitigation programs, mitigation bank or exchange. It seems like COG will be the reasonable body to start the work, but you know, COG, from COG's point of view, we are not an agency that with the authority to collect fees. So unless our policy board instructed us to conduct the study, but in order to collect the fees, we really need to have all the local governments to agree on this fee collection, and there needs to be some kind of, I don't know, agreement, joint power agreement or something. I don't know what that needs to happen. That's what I'm thinking.
Correct. The infrastructure needs to be thought out, but I will say this, Christine. Ambrish and I and our team have worked around the state on this, helping different agencies. And I happened to be party to a meeting that was held at the city of Fresno with the transit operator speaking with the city. And the type of conversation that was going on between the transit provider and the local agency was so encouraging. It was one of the first times that I had heard agencies talking about, well, what if we did collaborate? And what if we did do this? And what, you know, how could we create something? So I might suggest, you know, this is, your region is a seemingly very receptive region to the notion of collaborative efforts such as exchanges, banks, and fees. At least that's what I'm hearing when I pop into some of the meetings that I've heard there. But you're right, that general foundation needs to be created, how to do
right.
it.
Yeah. And right now, you know, we have a, we call it RTMF, Regional Transportation Mitigation Fee, that's being collected from residential and commercial development. And the money collected will go into regional projects, regional transportation projects that has been identified. We already have that. And you know, COG is actually, I think the Fresno County Transportation Authority is the agency actually that's implementing it. We're just collecting the fee for them. But then every jurisdiction in our county agreed to that, the RTMS fee. So, and there needs to be consensus, you know, to do that. But you know, so COG, in my opinion, we probably wouldn't take any action until the cities feel that there's a need for a regional program.
Sure.
In order to help the project sponsors to look at feasible mitigations. And we wouldn't have any problem conducting the study, looking at possible VMT reduction project that can go into the list of projects for that program, and figure out, you know, probably there needs to be a nexus study that will figure out how much it's going to be per unit or per 1,000 square footage. That's what we did for the RTMF fee. We did a nexus study. But it really needs to have a lot of regional consensus for us to go there. Yeah, I don't really know whether their you know, agency staff, you know, that at our meeting, have you guys you know, internally talk about going for a regional fee program, or what is being discussed in terms of mitigation measures?
across the state, there's an acknowledgement that individual projects will have difficulty mitigating VMT impacts. And it's very much like the conversation we're having now. There's an acknowledgement that this is a proper role of government to create the process to have something that then could green light good projects to move forward. It's the only agency that I know of now that actually has something similar to this is the City of Los Angeles. They have created a VMT fee program. It hasn't been exercised enough to have risen to a challenge. So we don't know yet if it will stand the test, but it is out there. I think that is where this is going to go, or a repeal of 743. I didn't say that. I did not say that.
Okay. Any questions about mitigation measures? Yeah, I mean, we have seen in the media that I think they were about, I don't know, 10, 20 letters sent to the governor's office requesting a delay for SB743 implementation. But I just don't think the governor or OPR agrees with that request. So I think most of the requests came from more of the inland area or the valley, the rural regions that really the 743 legislation was not really created for. So
I have a friend in the governor's office, and they said that all of that correspondence never even saw the governor. It was diverted to Kate at OPR. Right. So it never even got to his attention.
Right. So that's why, when we understand that, although there's this wish that the 743 could be delayed, but it's not happening. And the law is effective now. And this regional guideline really are created to help facilitate projects that are going to go through this VMT analysis. It's not because we're for or against 743. We're here just to provide some technical assistance, for projects that need to go through the process. So there's a question from Eric.
Yeah, I just saw it.
I will say that the question is, will Caltrans develop a VMT bank to address impacts on state facilities? There are a number of Caltrans representatives who are participating right now. I will acknowledge my participation on the Caltrans Technical Advisory Group, and that has come up at the headquarter level, but I don't know whether or not they're willing to move forward yet with that. But if anybody from the department wanted to respond, that might be enlightening.
Anybody from Caltrans want to chime in?
Yeah, I think you can unmute yourself.
Right.
Hi, everybody. This is Jamaica for Caltrans. And I will say we haven't solidified in the district a plan, but it is something that we're considering. We recognize that a lot of the projects are going to require a regional level mitigation. And so it's something that is on our radar. It's something that we're working on, but we do not have a plan developed at this point.
Thank you, Jamaica. All right. So do we have anything else on the agenda?
You know, because we have included the questions and answers as we've gone, the time that was provided for that, it was really the last bit. Are there any other questions about anything that participants have heard today? And again, while you're thinking about it, please know that this is the culmination of a year and a half and about 10 meetings that have been held in the Valley. If there is anything that the resources that are available really do provide a detail of all of the work that has led to today. But if there are any other questions, we'd be more than happy to answer them.
I guess we got a message from Carl Schubler. We really, well, in Brush, you just use Colinga as an example, right?
Yeah, it was just an example.
Yeah, it wasn't really any specific project. It was just, you know, in Brush, type in a random number and it really shows the, you know, the VMT goes down as we increase the size of the project or the intensity of the project. So.
Yeah, there's another question, Christine. Will the recording of this meeting be available for others to access?
Yes.
We have recorded this meeting, and Christine, you will share it, right, when it's ready for this?
Yeah, we'll share it. We'll post it on our website.
Okay.
Too. Yes, we'll share it.
With redactions for all my salty opinions.
I think it's okay. The state has heard our comments, and you know, we have shared our comments multiple times with the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
You got compliments for your salty comments. Well, all right. If there's no more questions or comments, I will wrap up the meeting by saying thank you very much for following the process for close to a year and a half. We really appreciate your support. And even if this is the last public meeting, you know, Fresno COG will be here. You know, if you have any questions, let us know. And LSA will be on contract with us for a little while. They're going to be doing on-call service with us too. So let us know if you have any questions, comments, or you need any help. You know, this is new to everyone. So feel free to contact us. With that, I will adjourn the meeting and thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.